Vision.
From CBS News Convention Headquarters in Miami Beach, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Collingwood in New York. And in Miami Beach, Eric Severide, Morton Dean, Ike Pappas, Bruce Morton, Joel Blocker, Robert Pierpoint at the White House, Bob Simon in Saigon, and Terry Drinkwater in San Diego.
Good evening. There were no surprises at this afternoon's first session of the Republican National Convention. It was supposed to be smooth and harmonious, and it was. One dispute still simmers over the delegate makeup for the 1976 convention, about which a report later in this broadcast. But if this convention goes by the book, and there's no sign it won't, it will be a far cry from the long sessions which kept Democrats working here till dawn. Senator Robert Dole, the Republican chairman, emphasized the difference as he got things started.
Will you please take your seats? This is the on-time convention.
Other more visible differences include the podium, brand new and with its fluted columns of Greek inspiration. But even Republican planners are not perfect, it seems. Some delegates up front complained that all they could see was the podium, not the speakers behind it and on it. Commented one good Republican up there in front, "It's a beautiful podium, though." Also, wider aisles made traffic go better, especially since the Republican delegates and alternates are fewer in number than the Democratic delegates alone. Republican harmony pointed up by the presence and a break with tradition of the Nixon family as the convention began. Her daughters, Tricia Nixon Cox and Julia Nixon Eisenhower, with her. But Chairman Dole emphasized that politics is in order here, with an attack on the Democratic candidate.
We must ourselves, each of us individually, between what America is and can be and what America should be to some of us. I, for one, believe McGovern leads us in the wrong direction, if he leads us at all.
Secretary of State Rogers led the convention in tribute to former President Eisenhower and was greeted with a standing ovation.
He was a strong man in the very deepest sense of the word, but he also was a good man, and I think this is why, up until the time of his death, long after he had left public life, he remained the most admired man in the world. When he left the White House, he and Mamie went to their farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Because of his varied services to this country, it was the first home they ever owned. And it was there with Mamie that he spent some of the calmest and happiest hours of all. She has invited us there today to share some of her thoughts and memories with us.
I want to tell you a little story about the night at Walter Reed before Mr. Nixon was inaugurated. Ike called him up to wish him, well, good luck. And at the end of the conversation, I could see the tears in his eyes, and he said, "This is the last time that I can ever call you Dick. Tomorrow it'll be Mr. President." He was very proud of Mr. Nixon, and if ever Ike had a disciple, certainly it was Mr. Nixon.
President Nixon, who comes to Florida tomorrow, visited briefly today with Mrs. Eisenhower at her Gettysburg home.
I've never been happier. The kids are doing well. We have a beautiful grandchild. Charlie and I spend more time together than ever, and he still treats me in that very special way. It really pays to take care of yourself. I exercise, eat right, and to be sure I get enough iron and vitamins, I take Geritol every morning. Charlie does too.
Geritol, more than twice the iron of ordinary supplements, plus 7 vitamins. Take care of yourself. Take Geritol.
Honey, you're incredible.
You know, some nights my wife has a hard time getting to sleep. The next morning, she doesn't even want to look in the mirror. But now she keeps Sominex in the house. Sominex is really good. It helps her relax and feel drowsy when she has trouble falling asleep.
A good night's sleep does make a difference, and Sominex can help you get it.
And after a good night's sleep, not only does she feel all rested and refreshed, she really looks it.
The one major issue still to be settled here has no direct bearing on this convention. Instead, it involves the party's old controversy between liberals and conservatives and concerns the 1976 convention. Morton Dean reports from the Rules Committee.
The controversial and politically sensitive Rule 30, the plan considering allocation of delegates to the 1976 National Nominating Convention, has finally come up for consideration. There will be several efforts at compromise. One is underway now, but the conservatives seem to have the votes to do what they want with the plan. The committee's session came to light a bit earlier on another issue over an amendment offered by one of the three blacks on this 105-member body. Edward Bivens, Jr., the mayor of a small town in Michigan, recommended that an additional 10 at-large members, young people, members of ethnic and racial minorities, be added to the Republican National Committee, which is nearly lily-white and which has few, if any, young members. Bivens argued that the entire process works to exclude blacks and young persons from positions of power at Republican conventions. The amendment was soundly defeated, consistent with the conservative track record established by this committee. One of the few liberal proposals adopted by the committee was agreed to late this afternoon. It would establish a co-chairman in the national party's hierarchy so that the party leadership would include a chairman of one sex, a co-chairman of the other. Morton Dean at the Rules Committee meeting.
There were a few other ripples of discontent. Edward Brooke, the black senator from Massachusetts, criticized the platform's outspoken anti-busing plank. And there was some mild talk about a floor fight to strengthen the plank to end the draft. And the Credentials Committee denied a seat to a delegate favorable to Representative McCloskey, the California Maverick. McCloskey himself said that he won't vote for Mr. Nixon if the bombing of North Vietnam continues. Other opponents of the bombing demonstrated near the convention hall, and Ike Pappas has that story.
3 men in wheelchairs led the march out of Flamingo Park about an hour after the first Republican session began. There were some 500 Vietnam veterans against the war and their supporters. They said they wanted to go to Miami Beach Senior High School near the convention hall where the National Guard is garrisoned. At the school, they spread out in front of locked doors where they shouted for the guardsmen to abandon their weapons and to join their demonstration against the Nixon administration. The guard simply stood back and watched. The Guard deployed some of the 900 troops inside the building to a defense perimeter which included the roof. 7 demonstrators got to the roof. They were taken into custody, but they did manage to cut some cables, knocking out 2 Guard radios. Most of the troops stayed behind locked windows, however. Frustrated at getting in to see the troops, the demonstrators climbed onto ledges and tried to pass leaflets through some of the windows. The crowd erupted in cheers when one guardsman peered down from a window and held aloft a clenched fist. The rally in front of the high school turned into a forum, with some of the veterans using their megaphones to discuss the Vietnam War.
If there is ever a battle that we are ever going to fight in again, it is going to be a battle for the people. And it's going to be an army for the people.
For more on the demonstration story, here is Bruce Morton.
Here in front of the convention hall, the demonstration has been less dramatic. Several hundred people spending a quiet afternoon. A Women's Liberation Group arrived first. They were joined later by one contingent whose members identified themselves as Zippies, another contingent members of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. There's been rock music, the bands performing on flatbed trucks provided by the city of Miami Beach. There's been some skylarking, some nudity, although the demonstrators themselves argued against that, and some rain, as you may be able to see. All in all, this has been a quiet gathering, several hundred people, no arrests, no confrontation, no trouble. Bruce Morton, CBS News, outside Convention Hall.
Charles Collingwood will have other news in a moment. I'll be back later in the broadcast with some more notes from this Republican convention. And our CBS coverage of tonight's second session will begin at 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time.
Not bad for an old man.
You're as young as you feel.
That's why I get flavored Haley's MO when my husband needs a laxative. It's the Feel Young laxative. For occasional irregularity, flavored Haley's MO blends a gentle, comforting agent with the thoroughness of the laxative doctors recommend most often.
I know, Dad. You're as young as you feel.
Flavored Haley's MO, the Feel Young laxative.
She was green. Ask me if I lost weight. What diet? It's my new girdle.
Oh, no. I wouldn't be trapped in one of those heavy things. Mine's comfortable. I never felt so free. It's called Free Spirit. It's so light you can see through it. But does it ever shape you? It even flattens your tummy.
Free Spirit Girdle from Playtex. Sets you free. Shapes you beautifully.
But don't tell her.
George McGovern today visited areas of Pennsylvania that had been flooded by Tropical Storm Agnes. One of his stops was the town of Kingston in the Wilkes-Barre area. Residents whose homes and businesses were destroyed by the floods crowded around McGovern as he accused the Nixon administration of sluggishness in helping flood victims. McGovern said that if the Vietnam War were stopped for just a few days, all flooded areas could be rebuilt. In his words, instead of bombing dikes in Haiphong, we ought to be rebuilding dikes in Pennsylvania. The bugging of the Democratic Party headquarters in Washington's Watergate Hotel was back in the news today with the name of a former top Justice Department official indirectly linked to the case. Robert Pierpoint reports.
From the day the bugging story broke, there has been a very deliberate effort by the Republicans to keep it far away from anyone in this White House, particularly the president. At his first briefing after the story hit the headlines, Presidential Press Secretary Ronald Ziegler called the bugging a third-rate burglary attempt which proper authorities are handling. Ziegler would not then or at any time since answer whether President Nixon has taken a personal interest in getting to the bottom of the matter. This week, Time magazine claims that the FBI found the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate had already been bugged, that the 5 men arrested there June 17th were removing the bug, and that the monitoring of the bug was taking place in 2 rooms across the street from the Watergate in a Howard Johnson motel. The monitoring was done, says Time, by men from what is called the Security Intelligence Squad of the Committee to Re-elect the President. Although Time does not link him directly, it implies that one of those involved might be former Assistant Attorney General Robert Mardian. Today in Miami, Joel Blocker asked Mardian about the story.
What is your reaction to these reports, Mr. Mardian?
Well, I can state categorically that I had absolutely nothing to do with the Watergate incident, had no prior knowledge of the Watergate incident, and any innuendo or inference to the contrary is an absolute falsehood. As to any allegation in that story concerning my involvement, it's a bald-faced lie.
Today, in a CBS Morning News interview with correspondents Dan Rather and John Hart, Presidential aide John Ehrlichman implied a private investigation had been carried out of the president's staff.
The thing that I think legitimately the White House ought to be concerned about is whether or not any federal employees, any White House employees were involved in this. Because if they were, then obviously they shouldn't be there. That investigation has been run to, I think, its ultimate conclusion, and it's very clear that none were.
Staff members of the Committee to Re-elect the President are not, of course, federal employees, and apparently were not investigated by the White House. Rumors have been flying around Washington lately that some men close to the President would soon be indicted by a federal grand jury in the Watergate bugging. Attorney General Richard Kleindienst, in an interview in today's Orlando, Florida Sentinel, confirmed that grand jury action is imminent. It could act within a week, he said, or it may delay until around Labor Day. But in any case, Kleindienst added that he had instructed the U.S. Attorney in Washington to let the chips fall where they may. There seems considerable confidence, however, that they won't fall here. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News at the White House.
An unmanned space observatory named Copernicus, after the 16th century astronomer, was launched into orbit today from Cape Kennedy. Copernicus carries 6 telescopes, one of them 32 inches in diameter, the largest ever placed in orbit. Free of the Earth's atmosphere, the observatory will study the stars with one goal: to learn how they were formed. On the New York Stock Exchange, the Dow Jones Industrials were up slightly today. Volume was 14,300,000 shares. The average price of all shares, however, was down 3 cents on both the New York Exchange and the American.
Nothing is more embarrassing than having your dentures slip. I know. I wear dentures myself. So when I bit into something hard, I worried. But I found Confident, a plastic formula denture adhesive. They guarantee Confident holds tighter, longer, better than anything you've used. If you don't agree, return it to them for your money back. Get Confident. Stop worrying about your dentures.
What kind of animal do you drive? Does it change directions well? Is it as stable under heavy loads? Is it as stable on turns? Is it as stable when it stops? These are Monroe Load Leveler stabilizing units for the front and for the rear. And they can give your animal the stability it needs far more than conventional shock absorbers can. If you want to feel your animal really perform, stop in where you see the Monroe barrel.
South Vietnamese troops are pushing into the Quay Son Valley to meet what has suddenly become a major enemy threat to Da Nang. Over the weekend, heavily equipped communist forces moved into strategic positions along the valley just a few miles south of the coastal city. The enemy advance was backed by tanks and long-range 130-millimeter artillery weapons, and never before have communist guns this size been set up so close to Da Nang. In overrunning the valley, the North Vietnamese captured the district capital of Quay Son itself, producing what has come to be a familiar sight in Vietnam. Bob Simon reports.
Once again, refugees and soldiers fleeing to safety on Hondas and bicycles, on trucks and buses, on anything they can find. After heavy artillery barrages and ground attacks, the North Vietnamese had driven government troops from Quay Son district town and a nearby fire base. It was the biggest government loss since the communists took over Quang Tri in the first days of May. Military sources said more than 12,000 civilians made it to safety, but that at least 25,000 were trapped behind communist lines. Retreating soldiers headed for Camp Baldy, now the only government-held position between the communists and the main northern artery, Route Number 1. The fall of Quay Son came on the 27th anniversary of Ho Chi Minh's takeover of North Vietnam. High-ranking officers now say a new phase of the communist offensive may have begun, and that its target may well be Da Nang, South Vietnam's second-largest city, only 35 miles to the north of Quay Son. Bob Simon, CBS News.
Egypt's President Sadat agreed to an interview last Thursday with a French journalist who asked him if the recent expulsion of Soviet officials from Egypt might induce the United States to come around to a more favorable view of Cairo's position in the Middle East dispute.
I think they will not come except when they find that their interests here in the area are going to be damaged. And we shall do our best to damage the American interests here in the area. I mean, very simply, that Israel receives even the loaf of bread from America. From the loaf of bread to the phantom, they receive from America as checks. Every check, 300 million, 500 million, 70 million, 100 million, so and so. Well, from where did America get this money? America gets this money from all parts of the world, and mainly from the Arab world, from their interests here in oil in our area here. So they are taking our money and they are providing our enemy with it. That's what I wanted to tell my brothers, the Arab leaders and the Arab people. We must not leave America, take their money and give it to Israel to kill our children and kill our laborers and kill our people and destroy our cities like Suez and Ismailia and all these places.
An angry debate over the Rhodesia question took place today at a meeting of the International Olympic Committee's Executive Board. But the board was unable to resolve the dispute, so the question will now go before a meeting of the full committee tomorrow. Some black athletes from other African countries are demanding that Rhodesia be expelled from this year's Olympics, and they threaten to boycott the Games if their demands are not met. Some of the black Americans in Munich say they would join such a boycott.
Wind up a toy? Simple. Except on those occasions when arthritis flares up with minor pain and its stiffness. For help, reach for Anacin. Anacin contains the pain reliever most recommended by doctors for arthritis. When even simple movement can cause pain, Anacin relieves minor pain, and so its stiffness for hours brings more freedom of movement without pain. Minutes after taking Anacin, the joy of doing simple things returns. Anacin.
I don't know if it's a cold or sinus.
Hey, what's wrong?
Oh, Jim, I feel all headachy and feverish.
You ought to take some Tristan tablets. They work on aches and fever.
And Tristan works directly on the critical sinus areas where cold's infection can breed when they fill with congestion. Tristan opens stuffy sinuses, helps drain congestion fast.
Hey, how is that cold now?
I almost forgot it.
Tristan tablets, strong medicine for sinus cold's miseries.
The differences between Republicans and Democrats here at Miami Beach go beyond outward appearances and political philosophy to outlook on life itself. And here's Eric Severide's analysis.
For this week, Miami Beach is Middletown, USA. Middle is an undramatic word in sound and meaning, but it has to do with the center of gravity of America's collective affairs, the core that holds us together. Both political parties try to capture that middle in spite of some exotic reasoning to the contrary among left liberal Democrats this particular year. Certainly this Republican convention reflects the effort. This assemblage is middle class, middle-aged, middle brow. And if there's a slight accent in its speech, that would be Middle West. 4 years ago, Richard Nixon said he wanted to bring the country together again. He has brought his own party together again. And he has always believed that the party that unites itself has a chance to unite the country. This is a convention of good feeling, not gay, not joyous, but contented and pleased with itself, about as much gusto as you ever see from prudent and consciously respectable people. What Mr. Nixon seems to be after is an era of good feeling. That is a phrase with definite meaning to American historians. The first era of good feeling, so named, was the period from about 1815 to 1825, and maybe the Eisenhower years could be so named. Good feeling based on order is what Nixon wants for the next 4 years. Liberal Democrats emphasize justice, Republicans emphasize order. They believe there can be no justice over the long run without order. Liberal Democrats would put it the other way around. And that's the ancient ambivalence and dilemma for free societies. There are many differences of emphasis between these two parties, and they start from different basic assumptions. When Republicans talk about national honor in the Vietnam context, they mean preserving government face and the formal commitments. When McGovern Democrats talk about it, they mean rescuing the traditional American reputation for humanitarianism, which they feel the present mass bombing besmirches. In social affairs, the McGovern Democrats feel that the poor and unfortunate are the victims of society, of environment. Republicans are inclined to think they are chiefly the victims of their own inner nature. Democrats worry about waste in the military, Republicans about waste in the Great Society programs. Republicans, partly because it's their record under scrutiny now, emphasize all that has been done. Democrats, all that remains to be done. To Republicans, the glass is half full. To the Democrats, it's half empty.
Signs scattered around town here read, Miami Beach loves Republicans. Of course, last month they read, Miami Beach loves Democrats. But the truth is that some local hotel and restaurant people, cab drivers and shop owners, are less than enchanted by either or both conventions. They say the Republicans and Democrats are small spenders and tippers and kept away other conventions and tourists this summer, which was bad for business. Florida's Democratic Governor Ruben Askew hinted at a change next time in his welcoming speech to the convention.
Governor Reagan and I were just sipping some Florida orange juice backstage, and I told him not to fret about losing your convention this year. In 1976, I promised to do everything I can to see that California gets both conventions.
By contrast, all was happiness today in San Diego, the city where the Republican convention was supposed to be held. Terry Drinkwater tells us about it.
To commemorate the fact that the Republicans aren't here, there was a parade through downtown San Diego. It was the mayor's idea to try to take the spotlight off Miami and to lift the spirits of any citizens who might be disappointed and depressed by the absence of the GOP. With dancing girls and park concerts, the mayor calls the celebration America's Finest City Week. Something to involve all citizens, the ridiculous and the sublime. Culture rather than political clamor is the emphasis here. You just wouldn't find a French horn concert this week in Miami. And what's more appropriate than Hallelujah for the afternoon choral concert? There's a certain serenity here in this conventionless city, no hassles. Some young people do take off their clothes, but the bareness has absolutely no political significance. It's all just to enjoy the sun a little bit more. San Diegans seem quite content to watch the antics of dolphins and porpoises rather than politicians. Tourists or local people, we could hardly find anyone who wasn't having a good time and faring very well indeed without the Republicans. But just to be sure we were right, in the time-honored tradition of journalists covering conventions, we asked taxi drivers.
All the cab drivers seem to be happy that we don't have it because we have enough business as it is.
I feel that there are too many Republicans here already, and they might as well go to Miami where they are appreciated. I don't appreciate them, really.
What would have been the GOP headquarters hotel is filled with tourists. Only the presidential suite is vacant. The Sheraton ITT hotels, whose alleged conflict of interest political contributions were part of the reasons the Republicans moved to Miami, are filled to capacity now. Several wedding parties and the Seroptimus Federation convention. At the hotel where several Midwestern delegations were to be housed, there's the Western Comic Book Convention. 800 fans of this pop art who are much more excited about the grand old pulp magazines than they are about the grand old party. And they have their heroes at this convention, too. Out here at the San Diego Convention Center, it is a bit lonely. But elsewhere in the city, there is a clear message from the citizens. Thank you, Republicans. Thank you anyway, but we're doing just fine without you. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, San Diego.
The San Diegans will get a look at President Nixon this week in person. He holds an airport rally there on Thursday on his way to his California home at San Clemente after the convention. And that's the way it is, Monday, August 21st, 1972. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, Miami Beach. Good night.
I'll start eating more sensibly. Later.
Today is the first day of the rest of your life, starting right with Total.
Go ahead. Live right, eat right. Start with Total cereals. Each ounce gives you 100% of the minimum daily adult requirement of vitamins and iron.
Today is the first day of the rest of your life, starting right with Total.
Yeah, I think I'll hide the dining room.
Lucite lets you paint what you think on any wall. Because Lucite is a wall paint with excellent covering power. Whatever you cover wet with Lucite will stay beautifully covered after it dries.
What do you think?
What happened to the dining room?
You know, I think Lucite lets you paint what you think.
Where is it?
It's all gone.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Charles Collingwood in New York. This is CBS.
Wow, what a great store.
Hey, don't let me forget the coffee.
The way your coffee tastes, why bother?
Here. Try some of this. What kind?
I only sell one kind. Maxwell House. If anybody knows beans about coffee, they do.
Hey, that's terrific.
Good to the last drop.
Hon, your mom used Maxwell House.
You're unlikely. Maxwell House has been around near as long as I have. It's got a flavor all its own. I think it tastes